Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another webinar in the PathOS training session. I'm very glad that you are here with us today, and this session we will be focusing on a very important topic, and that's exploring the economic impact of open science. We are joined here by two great experts, Professor Lena Tsipouri and Dr. Despoina Sousoni, who will share their insights on the work they did on exploring economic impact of open science. But before we delve into the session, let me just quickly introduce you the PathOS project. So PathOS project is a Horizon Europe project aiming to collect concrete evidence of open science effects, study the pathways of open science practices from input to output, outcome to impact, including the consideration of enabling factors and also key barriers. As you can see on the slides, PathOS brings together an interdisciplinary team of open science experts, infrastructure developers, bibliometricians, scientometricians, data scientists, sociologists, experts in socioeconomic impact, and policy experts. On this slide, you can already see some of the key outputs that we created within PathOS. PathOS aspires to serve as a gateway to a wide range of resources that will shed the light on open science impact. I invite you to browse our PathOS Open Science Results Hub, where you can find all the different kinds of PathOS results. For example, you can browse our Open Science Impact Indicator Handbook, which includes indicators and tools that might help you to measure open science impact. You can also explore Open Science Stories Registry and many other outputs that we created. Today, we will focus on one part of the PathOS project, the literature review on the economic impact of open science, and also we will dive deeper into one of the case studies. I'm very happy to introduce to you our two experts that join us for today's session. First, allow me to introduce Professor Lena Tsipouri. Lena is a Professor Emeritus of Economic Science at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens and co-founder of OPIX, a data-driven policy and strategic consulting company. Her areas of expertise are research and innovation, entrepreneurship, competitiveness, regional development, information society, European integration, and social policy. And our second speaker is Dr. Despoina Sousoni. Despoina is a program manager for impact, innovation, and industry at the ELIXIR Hub, with over 10 years of research experience in life sciences and background in intergovernmental organizations like the European Commission or the UNESCO. She specialized in open science policy evaluation and implementation of research funding schemes. Currently at ELIXIR, Despoina leads strategic initiatives in impact evaluation and industry engagement, collaborating with diverse types of stakeholders to drive innovation in research infrastructure. So I'm very excited to have you both here. And without further ado, I will pass the floor to Lena to begin her presentation.
Thank you, Teresa. Thanks everybody for joining. I think economic impact is rather exciting and difficult at the same time. It's exciting because money makes the world go round, but it is difficult because it's very, very hard to substantiate and really provide evidence of the attribution of any event to economic impact, because economic impact is a result of a multitude of factors, and it's very difficult to quantify which factor is really supporting the final outcome. So, economic impact of open science, I want to give you an overview of two basic parts. If I can have the next slide, please, Teresa. On the one hand, we have the theoretical argumentation, which is extensive, and it's almost intuitive to say, okay, if science is good, then open science will be better. So we have a fundamental rationale for the theoretical argumentation. We have some key arguments, and we also have some counter-arguments. The reason we need empirical evidence is precisely to understand in depth what is happening, because it's a challenge to generalize. Theoretical argumentations are fine, But you cannot generalize because there are differences in terms of sectors, in terms of countries, of regions, of regulatory environments, of behaviors. So we really need empirical evidence to see what is, in fact, the economic impact. And we need it to be measurable. And to be measurable, we have distinguished three categories: efficiency gains, if you can produce more with the same inputs, or produce the same outcome with less inputs, then it's a very efficient process, and open science contributes to economic impact. If we enhance innovation through open science, then this is a great economic impact. We have new products, new processes, better distribution, and so on. And eventually, it is economic growth that matters. So let me go first to the theoretical argumentation, if I can have the next slide, Teresa. The economic rationale for open science stems from a very basic idea of economics, that there are public goods and private goods. Public goods are the goods that are non-rivalrous and non-excludable. That means you can share them indefinitely without depletion. So it's not like, a piece of meat. I mean, if somebody eats this piece of meat, then it's lost. Nobody else can get it. But it's non-rivalrous if you can use it and it remains there. And it's also non-excludable because it may be knowledge is available, preventing others for accessing it or using it is difficult or costly. So it's a theoretical argument saying that public goods, like, the air that we breathe, they should remain in the public sector. They should be open. Can I have the next slide? The next bullet and the next one. Yeah. So what are the arguments? The arguments of this economic rationale of open science, which makes it a public good, is first that it increases research productivity because it's reducing the costs of data reproduction. If you get the data ready, what is the data that we may have? What happens in a research project if we do this and this to mice? If you get the data from somebody else, you can go a step further. So it increases research productivity if we can reproduce the data for free, we can collect them, process them, it increases research efficiency. It has an economic and academic impact, and the academic impact translates to economic benefit. There is a lot of research in the past demonstrating that science and research have substantial economic impacts. More science and research results, thanks to open science, will automatically generate more direct economic benefit. But this applies also to societal impact because it leads to economic gains. Positive societal effects are, of course, extremely important because at the end of the day, we're humans and we want humans and society to benefit. But this can also lead to increased access to knowledge and to more economic benefits, for instance, in the labor market. So if you have positive impacts on health, at the end of the day, you will have positive impacts on the labor market because you'll have less absenteeism in the contribution of economic growth. Now, of course, there are counter-arguments. And the basic counter-argument is that because individuals and companies want to benefit, to have profit, that's not only human, it's also acceptable in the capitalist system, then authors, be it individual authors or companies, may delay their papers and their demonstration of new knowledge strategically because they want to keep their data and their knowledge in order to benefit from it and not share it, taking the risk that others will benefit. So this is the theoretical argumentation. And we thought that because there is a theoretical argumentation which is positive, we need to find ways to measure it. And measuring the economic impact is difficult. There are challenges for it. There is a lack of comprehensive and standardized data that allow us to track long-term impacts on productivity, innovation, and growth. There is also a problem of attribution. Even if we have some data and we know that it is important, the benefits, for instance, increased collaboration, faster knowledge dissemination, and spillover effect, they are indirect. They may materialize over time. So how do we know that 3 open science articles have contributed so much that we can attribute a result to these if they are combined with other non-proprietary knowledge? And we have significant methodological constraints in that respect. One is that because we don't have this comprehensive and standardized data, we need mostly to rely on surveys and case studies. They have 2 problems. One is that they are costly. They are potentially biased. When you launch a survey, the likelihood of people who have benefit to respond more than the people who are reluctant is very high. So from the surveys and case studies, it's very difficult to generalize. And the second methodological constraint is that in the real world, there are scarce cases where real counterfactual analysis can be conducted. So we can find cases where we can say, under open science, this has happened. Under non-open science, with the same features, something different, less productive has happened. So having said that, I want to go into the presentation of a scoping review that we did under the PathOS project. The scoping review included academic impact, societal impact, and economic impact. The idea was, like in every scoping review, we start by an automatic search in Scopus and World of Science. It is then we get a large number of records, in our case, 7,500 records. And we started like checking whether these were all relevant. So at the end of the day, we ended up with only 26. We don't have time. We can discuss it further if you want in the discussion on how this was reduced, because we really wanted to have empirical evidence, numbers, to justify the theoretical argumentation. What did we see in terms of the papers reviewed? Can we have the next slide, please? The first is that in terms of discipline, it is clear that biomedical sciences and biomedical research are the most frequently studied domain, both theoretically and empirically. And this predominance can be attributed to a long-standing culture of data sharing. Doctors and medical researchers were the first to say, listen, sharing the results of clinical trials will be extremely important. And we need to use that and give other researchers the possibility to start, excuse me, to start from where we finished. So biomedical in terms of disciplines. There are other areas like fisheries and artificial intelligence and machine learning and agriculture, where there is a lot less evidence. In terms of timing, the relevant literature exhibits a slightly increasing trend, which is good. But because of the difficulties, researchers are not so keen to embark in research for comparing open science to closed science. In terms of authorship, we have very few authors who are prolific. Most authors are actually either not engaging at all in open science, or they have one or two papers because they had one particular case of interest. And last but not least, in terms of geographic distribution, it's the technologically advanced countries who are more interested. The intuitive reaction would be that the global south benefits more from open science because they have less resources to embark in research and get closed science results. But we didn't find any evidence of a lot of research or use of open science in the global south. Now, in the next slide, I can show you what was a distribution with two dimensions. The first is types of open science, so open and fair data, open access, open source software, and open methods. And we distribute them between the contribution that we could identify in efficiency gains, innovation, and economic growth. If you make the sum, it's more than 27. And the reason it's more than 27 is that several empirical evidence contributes from one paper to trying to prove both efficiency gains and innovation, or both innovation and economic growth. So what are the results? In terms of economic impact and open and fair data, 13 papers were used, quite convincing in their content, particularly strong in the case of life sciences and its applications to the pharmaceutical industry. This is compatible with the overall literature of concentration. Efficiency gains increase because researchers save both time and financial resources in conducting their work. That's a result of both surveys and case studies. Financial savings arise from avoiding expenses such as subscription fees for accessing essential research data. And last but not least, time saving occurs not only because the research process is more efficient, but also because researchers can directly use existing data. So even data that they are not searching for. If we turn from open access from open data to open access, the evidence is more limited, but again, in the cases reported, quite clear. Efficiency gains because researchers save time and cost for accessing knowledge. It allows them to explore a large pool of information at no cost, enabling researchers to efficiently identify and utilize the most relevant resources, ultimately saving time and money. So that means they have not only they have relevant new knowledge, but they have the possibility to look through a large array of new knowledge. Empirical evidence on efficiency gains comes also from various sources: SMEs, economic value of COVID, cost-saving analysis of specific repositories. Despoina will present one of them with a very clear case, and even time-saving benefits for the public sector. Counterfactual analysis could be used for comparing non-patent citations in open and closed access research. And there we have very clear quantitative evidence, and it's one of the rare cases where we can have counterfactual analysis, because we can see when a patent cites literature for the invention, we can compare how much open publications compared to closed publications are quoted. And finally, for the economic growth, there is a modification of the Solo-Swan growth model. This is the standard model measuring the contribution of other factors than labor and capital to the economic process. So there is a modification to include the idea of openness, so not only technological progress, but also openness for economic growth. This is very difficult. We can go into it in the discussion if you feel it would be helpful. If we go to open source software, there are difficulties, but we did have a few papers, and at the microeconomic level, we see that open source software enhances efficiency by reducing costs and saving time again. And it plays a crucial role in fostering innovation, particularly in startups and technology-intensive sectors. And similarly, at the macroeconomic level, there is one report from the EU which suggests that open source software enhances labor productivity. I have to say we have to be very, very careful here, because we are dealing with the economic impact of scientific research, open science, and open source software is not only scientific, there is also commercially designed open source software. So here we were very careful to try to distinguish between scientific and non-scientific open source, and there are theoretical difficulties and methodological difficulties in addressing that. Finally, the economic impact of open methods. There were two papers, and both papers were very, very convincing in their arguments, because they could do counterfactual analysis. So giving researchers more openly new methods to work with, that can have very significant benefits. So summarizing all of it together, the general conclusion is that in terms of economic impact of open science, we have half of the puzzle resolved, but there are many more pieces that we need to put in place. So the measure impacts, that's the part of the puzzle which is resolved, are overwhelmingly positive, and they suggest there is an open science contribution to growth. There is one exception in these papers. We know that economic benefits now primarily stem from efficiency gains measured in terms of time and cost savings, no matter which type of economic science. The most precise impacts come now from detailed studies by large repositories. And these are the repositories that are interested to present the results. And finally, the macroeconomic impacts, they can be analyzed using standard growth models, but the key challenge here remains in defining the parameters of what is the degree of openness, what is the degree of accessibility, what is the degree of use of this. So I think these are the conclusions I want to leave you with. And after Despoina presents one of the case studies, there are 6 case studies, as we mentioned in PathOS, then at the end we can discuss the challenges and what comes next. So these 6 case studies are in bioinformatics, which try to assess the impact of open bioinformatic resources on industry. We have a case on COVID-19, which gave a huge boost to openness because of the urgency of the matter. There is another one on emerging topics fostered by open science, and there is a gender issue in AI and climate innovations. Then there is a cross-cutting effect due to open research data from national repositories, trying to identify distinctive features, research data and knowledge use and uptake in non-academia, and finally, the accelerating effect of collaborations, so how openness helps within academia and industry. So this is an overview, and Despina, please present ELIXIR, which is one of the most interesting case studies.
Thank you, Lena, and thank you everyone for joining. So I'm going to present you the case study of ELIXIR on bioinformatics, how bioinformatic resources are used by industry. So before we jump to this, of course, to give you a background of what is ELIXIR, we are a research infrastructure that bring together experts from 21 countries that they manage and generate life sciences databases, training materials, software tools, standards, which is a very important component, and compute resources. So what we actually are, we are a network of bioinformaticians. All these resources, these 400 digital resources, they can be found online and they are all openly accessible. The only limitation you might have is your internet connection and maybe to find them if you don't know about them. So in the next slide, we have an example of one of our members, the European Bioinformatics Institute, a live usage map. This member has very popular resources in life sciences, and you can see how much they're used. In the next slide, just to say that, of course, before even we started with PathOS, we have been already working in ELIXIR around impact, because as I said, we are these resources, these digital resources, they are very popular and they are the base for life scientists, not only in Europe, even though we are a European infrastructure. So we know that we generate impact, for instance, in research efficiency, because you don't need to search very much into find these resources. They are well spread. We are creating scientific legacy. We also create opportunities for everyone because they are all open and accessible. We also make sure that these resources are sustained, so they are not only staying within the group that generate them, but we create this community that manages and contributes in these resources. We also develop skills through training, but also we consider that we influence high-level policy and governments in their decisions. Next, a bit more on where, I assume that most of you understand what is life sciences, but what we have seen that we have impact, it is in diseases like cancer, pandemics, of course, or other diagnostics, but also in environment like climate change, because we are also looking into biodiversity, food and agriculture. Next. So as I said, we know we are widely used by life scientists, and of course research is not only happening in academia, but also happens in industry. And for that, until the PathOS project, we have taken proxies in estimating these usage. We keep close relationships with companies that we know they are using open data and they rely on them. And back in 2020, we did a survey where we asked small and medium enterprises from Europe, 50 small and medium enterprises, on how much open data are important for their products and services, and 76% of them, they said that they couldn't provide their products and services without accessing data from open repositories. So this is the way that we have been doing until now. Now, for the PathOS project, we wanted to look more in depth of how we are used by industry to create innovation. What are some of the long-term benefits that this way is generated for the society and the economy, and of course some effects that we might not easily see from these very generic approaches that we have taken. So the methodology that we used have been first some desktop research regarding ELIXIR supported publications, and I've put here in blue a bit more detail on the methodology. We also looked at skills that they are referenced in job vacancies from academia and industry. We also look at patents that they reference ELIXIR resources and some field research through surveys and interviews from the cost-benefit analysis. For the sake of this presentation, I'm going only to cover the last 2 points. So I made a simplified impact pathway, again, for this workshop. The things are, of course, much more complicated, but here I'm using just an example of what an ELIXIR member activity can be on the left side. For instance, the ELIXIR members are developing databases for life science data. They also have to make these databases user-friendly and findable. And also, through ELIXIR, of course, we establish a community regarding the people that they are providing the data, also the users, but also the managers. As we said, these are community efforts. So the outcomes that these activities generate is that this knowledge is accessible and reusable. It is also saves time and costs from the users because they don't need to regenerate this data and they can easily find this data. If they know where they are, they just go back to them, but also through research, new ideas and collaborations are generated. Now, about what are the long-term impacts, we believe that research is creating solutions for social challenges and social needs, but also it can create economic growth for a company, but also through taxes for the public. Next, I've put some of the key performance indicators that you might think to measure all these outcomes and impacts that I mentioned. For instance, for accessibility, you can see how many visitors or downloads or citations a database or a resource has. Regarding the value, the savings for the users is identified by the user. You cannot really know that until someone tells you about it. And about new ideas, we believe that by referencing a database in a publication or a patent is a generation of new science. And for collaborations, we can also see the collaborative authorship in these papers and patents. For the solutions for the societal needs, of course, we can approximately search for this through the areas of the research application, in patents or in publications. Usually, patents and publications, they can be categorized in technical fields. And for the economic growth, for this case, we focus on granted patents and the citations by other patents. So it shows the reusability of these patents and also the creation of a competitive advantage for the applicant. So for the first point of visitors and downloads and citations, I'm not going to cover that. As I said, we know that we are used, and also we know the limitations of the methodology behind that, which I can cover if there is a specific questions. Usually this is seen through Google Analytics or IP addresses, but even that has some limitations of identify really the users. But I'm going to cover next the value for users. And we did that through a survey that we did for UniProt, which is a very popular open data resource for protein information. And that was part of the cost-benefit analysis. And for that, we had almost 100 industrial respondents. And you can see in the little table on the top, the size of the companies that these respondents were representing. Most of them were from large enterprises and also some from medium, small, and micro. So the most nice, I would say, or the most well-defined question that we saw a few differences was in the question on the left, where small and micro companies agreed that their job will be less good in quality and maybe more expensive if they were start using a paid alternative of this resource. So we see that maybe the smaller the company, the more worry about quality and costs. Regarding time wasted, the most responses that we got from large companies were more on the admin side of things. They were worried about ad hoc agreements with different resources and maybe not even one resource that could replace this open resource, but even more. So they were worried that, this will be a time wasted. But for the smaller companies, most worrying was, instead of the admin side, assuming that they can move much faster than the larger company, was the finding, accessing, and integrating another resource or multiple other resources into their systems. Regarding the innovation output, what we've seen is that UniProt, despite that it's such a popular resource, it still contributes to a pool of data. So most of these respondents, they didn't say that they rely exclusively for the products in UniProt in this database, but it just contributes to a pool of data. So it shows that if you take one part out, we cannot be sure how this pool of data will be formed for them. And this pool of data is used to generate models and tools and softwares that then they sell to their customers. Next. Yes, now I'm going to show you the analysis that we did regarding patents, and it's going to cover the red parts. So it's going to be 2 or 3 slides in a row, so I'm not going to show you this impact pathway again. So the patents that reference ELIXIR resources, as I mentioned before, a lot of resources, around 400 resources, and we found that we are referencing more than 10,000, in approximately 10,000 patents. And just to mention here, if you're familiar with patents, we are talking about patent families. So these patents, they were in 35 technology fields, with most of them being from the biotechnology and the pharmaceutical sector, but also some in chemistry and compute, which shows a diversity of sector impacted. We also looked at the inventors of the patents, and we see that they were coming from 75 countries, with 30% of them being European applicants. So we exactly saw that despite that these resources are European, we still have an impact beyond Europe. 31% of the applicants, they were industrial applicants, so from companies representing more than 1,500 companies, with almost 1/3 of them were coming from Europe. So we see the industrial innovation again in multiple countries. Interestingly, 75 companies have more than 10 patents from research, which indicates that these 75 companies, they have high reliance of their patents and their competitive advantage on these open ELIXIR resources. And last, 48%, they are granted patents, so it shows that there can be already some revenue generated by these patents. As we said, when a patent is granted, means that it can only be sold or used after the agreement with the applicant, and that is usually coming with a revenue. So a bit more analysis on the citations of the patents, because that shows how much impact this invention has on other inventions, is that they on average in these 10K patents, it was 13 citations per patent. I also put the historical evidence of granted and not granted publications on the right down side, just to show that granted patents, they take time to be granted, so it is also something that it takes time to show impact. Go back to the box on the left side. On the top-sided patents, we can see that I put the 5 top-sided patents, where we can see on the second column that is not only one resource that is mentioned, but we are talking about 4 different resources, and also the top-sided with more than 1,500 citations. It comes from academia, and there is some European involvement. And the rest 3 have some industry involvement. And then we also did some analysis on the industrial granted patents, and we see that 70% of these patents, 72% of these patents, they have a solo industry applicant, and 28 of them have collaborative applicants. It is actually not very common to have collaborations in industrial patents. So the fact that 28% they have some collaboration, it might be correlated with the fact that this we are talking about an open resources, but of course this is an assumption. And also only 18% of the patents they saw cross-border collaborations. Also, it is expected to be low, so it's good to see that it is almost 20%. And yeah, I'm passing now to the lessons learned from this study. I would say that it is very important, based on what we have seen, to keep some historical records. The survey that we did as part of the cost-benefit analysis have shown us some indicators, and it will be nice to repeat this exercise again in the future and see how the trends are changing. Of course, the more you search, the more you find, and we were lucky enough to be part of PathOS project, so to have the time and effort to invest on searching more and finding more. But now, from our side, we are finding the limits in order to identify the most informative cases and focus only on them in the future. It is also important to keep a balance between quantitative and qualitative information. What I've shown you for now, it's quite quantitative, but definitely having the cases to describe a full story, it is also very important. And lastly, and with that, we pass to Lena from the lesson learned. It's the encouragement for the correct referencing, not only in publications, which is a very common practice nowadays, but also in patents or policy documents or data referencing. And that, of course, cannot happen by itself. It's, of course, a cultural change, but also we need incentives we need incentives for correct usage of open science beyond academia, and look how industry or policymakers can help. And with that, I pass to Lena.
I'll just remind the speakers of time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Despoina. I mean, these are future directions and policy implications we created together with Despoina. Probably because of my age, she passed the floor for me to present them. There are, of course, many ideas on future directions and policy implications. We try to summarize. The one thing that is very clear is that there is a misalignment between the theoretical evidence and the practical, empirical economic impact. There's a lot more theoretical evidence that calls for more empirical evidence. And because the quantitative evidence is limited, this discourages researchers to do more research. And the main lesson for future directions is that more needs to be done. And more needs to be done, and there are incentives needed because the market is not driving research towards this direction. The second future direction is that there is a tendency to research in what is easier. The low-hanging fruits like open and fair data, open access, people do research there. United States, United Kingdom, there are many repositories, there is some support, so people do research there. What we need is also to go into the more scarce areas researched, like the economic impact of citizen science, which I think would be great to have. No evaluations at the moment. The impact of open evaluation, the intuitive reaction is that there we would find less, while citizen science is important. And also the difference between OECD and the Global South. Without public intervention and support, it's unlikely that we are going to see a lot of empirical evidence on that in the future. So policymakers need to take the message and invest, incentivize in ensuring complete and accurate metadata. We saw this in the ELIXIR case and in all the case studies for that matter, not only for publications, but also for patents, for policy documents, for policy presentations, the metadata are sometimes a real trouble to sort out. And this could facilitate both a cost-benefit analysis and counterfactual analysis if all the data were there. Finally, one policy implication, not of open science, but a policy implication of the current geopolitical situation, is that we are a bit skeptical of the near future of open science. Open science has been gaining momentum, but since the election of the new federal government in the United States, we see a reinforcement of anti-globalization movements, and even in Europe, increasing worries about what is called research security. So let's make sure that significant data, new data and new research results do not land in the hands of our competitors. And this was always the case for defense, but now it's also getting the case for emerging technologies and research autonomy. So research security and anti-globalization may be hampering the promotion of open science, and we need to keep this in mind. Thank you very much. That was all from our side.
Let me just ask the question that I have for our speaker. So I would start with Despoina. So Despoina, while ELIXIR resources are open and available, why do you think it is so challenging to understand how they are used by industry? Do you have?
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. Well, I mean, the problem is that industry don't have any reason to tell you why they're using them. They don't have any interest. And if we are talking about small companies, they don't also have the time, because a micro company, there are very few people doing a lot of different jobs. So also there are some negatives that we have identified by talking to companies, such as they release information of their methodology, for instance, to competitors, which can create problems for the company, but also some questions regarding pricing. If you use, for instance, a lot of open data, then why your price is so high? So these are some of the negatives, for instance, that we have heard, that they are actually stopping companies from stating the usage of open resources. On the good side, smaller companies, they do find it as a way to have credibility and trust if some of these resources, they are widely used in the research community, then the fact that their services and products, they are relying on these resources is a good way to create trust. So these are, I would say, the points that, at least from our side, we always try to approach companies with. And this study also that we did through patents and publications, it helps us to be even more direct on the questions that we have for industry. So approaching industry in the right way is a challenge.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the answer. And I see we have already first a question in the chat. Helena, would you like to perhaps unmute yourself and tell us your question, because it's a bit long, or I can read it, whatever you prefer. Okay, so I will read the question that is in the chat. So Helena wrote in the chat, I'm representing a community, neuroscience, where we don't have a problem incentivize open science. We have a community that wants to share data, but they need training in data management. They need open standards to use, which my organization provide. But we cannot get funding to do this, despite the fact that funding agencies are putting data sharing mandates on the scientists. So how do we incentivize funding for teaching people to do data sharing? And there is continuation of the comment. We also have researchers who want to develop standards and other tools for data sharing, but we are having difficulties getting this funded as well. So perhaps, Lena, would you like to take this question, and then we can continue with this point?
Yeah, maybe Despoina can give a more precise response on how they did on ELIXIR. My point is that I can't speak for national funders, but the European Commission is very open and eager to find bottlenecks and barriers So if you suggest, I think that part of this problem is that such needs are very scattered and refer to rather small budgets, which is very difficult to address with big programs like Horizon Europe. But if we can formulate a scheme on how this can be done, and maybe have a network of various potentially interested stakeholders, I think the European Commission would be ready to hear that. But maybe, Despoina, you have some concrete experience on how this is done in ELIXIR.
Yeah, yeah. I assume Helena is an academic, but this is my assumption from the fact that she mentions neuroscience. So what I would say is that the way that we do in ELIXIR, we had funding on data standards and data management in the past, but we are a research infrastructure. So I would say be aware of the research infrastructures, try to join these communities, because probably a community funding is more possible than individual. Again, I don't know how this effort that of Elena is done, but try to join communities, try to join. We have also a lot on interoperability standards and data management plans. So coming into something that maybe is already existing and try to improve it and make it more relevant to your science, I would say is a way to go. Of course, also from our side, we put it together with other projects. For instance, for the COVID pandemic, we had one that we did specifically on data management for infectious diseases. So that was a bigger project, and one of the work packages and tasks was on that. So do not generate new things, just try to join communities already existing out there.
Thank you for both for answers, and I wonder if there is any other question from the audience. We'll be happy to take one or two. Still have time. So perhaps if
hello?
Yeah, hi, Matthias. Go ahead.
Okay, hi. I switched my camera on, right? Thanks. It was a great talk. I've got a question. It goes in a similar direction about sustainability of these open resources. So ELIXIR is, I think, a good example. So maybe you can give some hints or guidelines, because so I develop databases too, so it's always difficult after projects to keep them running, because people leaving, and so, and it's really a big challenge for lots of smaller databases to say, okay, you should get in large collaborations. Okay, it's a challenge too. But is there a model where you can say, okay, we also provide commercial opportunities for other partners, that there's kind of a reimbursement. Okay, probably ELIXIR is financed by calls, by funding, so you can always say, okay, we have got this case study, we produce these benefits. But is there more direct where I say, okay, that you can that people contribute, especially companies, when they say, okay, we like this feature, so that they directly contribute. So, or some other ideas how to keep this kind of structures running for longer and not be only dependent from one successful grant funding to another.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias. It has been a problem identified, is exactly what you described. The funding is very hard, and the sustainability is always a question. And talking about industry also in this presentation, when we are talking to industry, they always say that we feel the insecurity of the sustainability of a resource. So sometimes we prefer, if the resource is not very popular or very established, we would still prefer to use a paid one, just because it gives us this business model behind it that creates some security of sustainability. So this is not to be against open science and free, but just to show that there is this insecurity. So from ELIXIR, while we rely a lot, as you said, in public funding, and we create these communities, so the burden is not only going in one direction, but is diffused among different communities that they find it interesting, and build all these community in the back. We have been thinking, and some of our members, they are working on the topic of extra services. Switzerland, for instance, some of their services, they do provide consultation on the side. So while the resource is free, there are these cases where they can be provided some resources paid for industry to support the other resources. But it is also a challenge that I think the next years, the Commission and at the national level, they will come up more and more pushing us to create this type of models. This is the trend that we see.
Great, Despoina, thank you for answering, and Matthias,
Thank you.
for your questions. So I think we are reaching the time already. So I will just ask our speakers if you will have one key takeaway message for our audience. So what it would be. We can start with Lena. Yeah.
Okay, I think the participation to the webinar and the questions show that there is an interest, that there is something to do in this area, but difficulties are still there. And I think it's clearly, if we want to look at knowledge as public good, which I claim should be the case, then we need the public sector to intervene and intervene more. Until now, we saw the public sector supporting large infrastructures and the low-hanging fruits. It needs to go further. And I see there is interest for more take-up. Despoina?
From my side, I would say, as someone that I love open science, and I have been more familiar with impact now, it's to go a bit beyond academia and the public funding, and try to see how open science is impacting other sectors like industry, which is a very different sector, and it has to be the approach should be different than what we have been taking for academia. And if we manage to reach a point that we understand, then we can have more concrete conclusions about the impact that it generates. And saying that, also in the journey of impact, we shouldn't be ignoring the negatives, because this is a process that you learn from people by talking or by collecting information. So there will be also negatives, as on all initiatives. Open science also have some negatives, and we should learn from them.
Perfect. Thank you very much, both. And just a last word from my side. Thank you very much all for joining. We really appreciate your time and engagements on today's meeting. And just to let you know, there are other upcoming training events. So if you would like to learn more, for example, on the detail of the cost-benefit analysis that was many times mentioned during our session, so please join our upcoming webinar. And also, if you will be so nice, we will be very happy if you could provide feedback on this webinar, because we very value the feedback and want to improve our session even more. So thank you one more time for joining. Thank you, Lena and Despoina, for sharing your amazing knowledge and all the stuff you did for PathOS. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you on some other events that are upcoming in the PathOS project. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.